Here is the video of Donald Trump revealing the Board of Peace Charter in Davos, Switzerland at the World Economic Forum. And the Board of Peace came out of the Gaza peace deal, setting up the framework for the funding of Gaza's redevelopment. And remember, the Trump administration likes to blend like peace and business deals. And when this Board of Peace was created through the UN, you had countries like France saying that the Security Council was regretfully unable to create the conditions for peace in Gaza. And a lot of that is because the United Nations is very slow and bureaucratic. It is built on this principle of egalitarianism between all nations, where every one of the 193 member states has an equal vote. And a good example of how slow the UN is and what it can cost is that in the 90s, you had this force of UN peacekeepers monitoring local elections in Rwanda, which they thought could get violent. They did get violent, 800,000, and the peacekeepers were repeatedly ordered not to intervene. So they were literally there while this happened. And again, for example, you have the Security Council failing 3 times to adopt any condemnation of the use of chemical weapons during the recent Syrian civil war. And in this context, you have the United States under the Trump administration pulling out of 31 UN groups. So there were a lot of smaller groups, but some of the big ones were like the UN Women and the UN Population Fund. UN Women is focused on gender equality. The UN Population Fund is focused on sexual and reproductive health. And while those are clearly important missions, I think it's important to point out why we have the United Nations. So the United Nations Conference was convened in 1945, right after World War II. And when they signed the charter, it was explicitly there to prevent another world war. And in my research about the Board of Peace, I think that Donald Trump is looking out at this and seeing that the Security Council was just unable to do anything meaningful in the Gaza-Israel conflict. So then he starts talking, for example, to Turkey, which is a neighbor, the Egyptians, the Qataris. He puts together this 20-point peace plan, completely outside the Security Council. And then after this plan is put together in November of 2025, the Security Council authorizes this international stabilization force. And in the 20-point plan, you see that it establishes this Board of Peace. Neither China nor Russia voted on the resolution at all, but it did pass. And this kind of sleight of hand starts emerging where you have the Security Council endorsing the idea of this board to be kind of an authority that's external to the United Nations, even giving the board the authorization to use force. And then Trump walks into Davos, which is essentially the mecca of globalism, and then reveals the Board of Peace. So a lot of the people there are saying, is this a new world order? And they call Trump's view of how things work transactional, because it costs $1 billion to get a permanent seat on the Board of Peace. And the countries that get on board with the board are like, for example, Saudi Arabia. Here is Mohammed bin Salman, importantly, who had been called on by many participants in the United Nations to be sanctioned. Turkey. And I think it is relevant to show that the Israelis did not like the idea that Turkey would be involved, but they are. And these countries have some weight. I mean, we are selling almost $150 billion of military goods to Saudi Arabia in just this one deal. And Turkey has one of the most powerful militaries in the world. So the Board of Peace has this vibe of a deal-making body. It has billions of dollars of cash in it, participants with big militaries, and man, Trump designated as chairman for life. He gets veto authority on everything. He can control who's in the Board of Peace. He can set the agenda. He literally said, once this board is completely formed, we can pretty much do whatever we want to do, and we'll do it in conjunction with the United Nations. So Trump is suggesting that has been given the permission by the UN Security Council to operate transnationally with force and independently. France declining to join, Britain not joining yet. Importantly, I noted that Trump invited China to join. And this thing is set up kind of like a company. This founding executive board, look who's on here. It's actually pretty interesting. Marco Rubio, Steve Witkoff is kind of Trump's deal maker guy. Jared Kushner, his son-in-law who negotiated the Abraham Accords. Tony Blair, the former prime minister of the UK. This guy, Mark Rowan, a huge hedge fund manager. This guy, Ajay Banga, who is the president of the World Bank. And this guy, Robert Gabriel, is one of Trump's national security people. And so this founding board oversees all this Gaza-related stuff. And Jared Kushner has a terrific vision for Gaza. This video is not really about the Gaza rebuilding as much, but the Scandinavian countries basically don't want to have anything to do with the board of peace because a lot of these European powers see it as a threat to the United Nations. Because basically in the United Nations Charter, the Security Council shall determine the existence of any threat to peace. And here's Trump saying we have the permission to do whatever we want to bring peace wherever we want. And here's the European Council on Foreign Relations basically calling this situation the jungle. But it looks like the Board of Peace honestly has this crew of wealthy and powerful people with big militaries that's really structured to do deals. And this European Council on Foreign Relations sees the Board of Peace as unlikely to mean that the US is going to leave the UN, but that it is going to use the Board of Peace to try to broker peace in Ukraine and Russia, maybe work in Venezuela, maybe places like Iran. And that was the sense I left my research with, is that it's basically just meant to be something that's effective in the face of a United Nations that is bloated and doesn't work very well. And Trump and his people have been through negotiating the Abraham Accords, which is basically a mix of business and peace deals. Because I think to Trump, he sees business and economic development as a really important factor in keeping a place peaceful. Trump likes to make deals. So what are your thoughts on the Board of Peace?